This is just our agenda. So we're going to be working through 4 main areas today. So the first is just designing your outcome. This is an introductory of, why are we here? What is this for? And just how do we get started? Then we're going to migrate into external market forces. So there are really 2 meaty parts of this presentation. So external data and research, and then internal data and research. So we're going to go through those case by case, and then wrapping up, and we'll do this throughout, we're going to try to package this for you. So where do you go from here? How do you identify those key insights to make a meaningful mark on your business and sort of shake up your day-to-day.
Okay. Do you want to take over the share?
No, why don't you keep sharing, and then when we get, I'll take it back over eventually. I'll let you know.
Okay. Thank you for attending today. I'm excited to have you here. This is a subject that's kind of near and dear to my heart because as a marketer, I always consider everything that's going on in the universe of the target, not just our own internal view. And so, I really invite you today to look at your business in a new way. We're going to talk through a few models and techniques for doing that. And then we will have a portion, as Maggie mentioned, that talks about your internal data. But I want you to think really broadly. Opportunity doesn't come from looking at the same old. It has to come from a spark or from an inspiration. And how that happens is when we challenge ourselves to stay curious. We're really here to help you today. This is something, we do these free workshops because we believe in what we do and we want to share that knowledge with other people. That is the primary focus. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. There is a lot of content in the presentation. So if we don't get to everything, I invite you to reach back out to us, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you over email. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look for some unique aspects through a case study to help your company potentially be more profitable, how to go about trying to identify new ideas or innovations, ways to improve your marketing strategy or beat the competition. But we're really looking for nuances that can make the difference to take your business from good to great. I did say this a few minutes ago, but I'm going to say it again. True marketing requires curiosity. And that sounds kind of like a given, but when you think about the winners, and I don't love that word, but when you think about those who are successful, it's people who take the time and who want to take the time to understand their business in context, from the customer experience to the external perception. It means kind of going to the places that you may not have originally thought. Maybe it's you do 5 interviews with customers to understand what is it really like when they take the product out of the box, or what is it like when they experience your service. And I invite you to be curious. I always love this quote. I know people have heard it a lot, but insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So a lot of times as marketers, we're in the hot seat. We're given a budget. We're asked to, make it rain from that budget and make that budget work as hard as it possibly can. And what's interesting sometimes is, depending on the size of your organization, maybe you're the founder and you're also the one that's executing the campaign, or maybe you're part of a larger organization. People sometimes want you to keep doing the same thing and increasing the results or increasing the threshold. And it's really hard to do that when you don't add anything new to the mix. So today, both through external forces and looking at a tool that we use at 2 Octobers, we're hoping that that will inspire you to try new things. So step 1 of this process is really designing your outcome. And it's intentional that we have this slide here in the sense that once you start talking about looking at external forces, you could go really wide, really fast. And it's good to be inspired and it's good to be curious, as we just talked about in the previous slides. But if you go too wide and you get excited by shiny objects, as I do, you wind up with a lot of shiny objects and not necessarily a map of how to move forward. So there needs to be a container that is created so that when you set out on what I call the expedition to look externally, that you check whether or not that thing that you want to learn or understand fits in that original container. So these are just some prompts. What is your current and desired business situation? Are there assumptions that need to be validated? Maybe you always think that the customer is one type of person. Maybe it's a man, age 30, who likes sports, and you've built a business around that, but you suspect that maybe there's a woman target that's buying also. Maybe they're the same age. So it depends on what you are trying to learn, but you want to create that container so that as you go out and seek information, that you're going to be able to use it. So the challenge is always, as you find the shiny objects, how am I going to use this to help me solve my business problem? Some people call this analysis paralysis. I don't love that. It's kind of negative, but it can be paralyzing. And I'm one of those people who definitely gets excited by ideas and little nuances of things. And so I often have to say, okay, how am I really going to use this? How am I going to use this to help my client? How am I going to use this to help this business grow? And so the cartoon here, of course, we can make fast decisions once we've considered the 4,872 factors. That's a little bit of a joke in the sense that you don't want to go to 5,000 factors. You want to stay within the neighborhood of what you're trying to accomplish. And I know that's somewhat of a duh, but once you get excited by data or information, you can kind of lose sight of that. So I wanted to spend some time there. You should be aware of. It doesn't mean you necessarily need to live and die by those external forces, but it's good to know. So for example, I think COVID is, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but COVID is the best example of that was something we could not control that dramatically changed human behavior and changed everything from how we live to how we interact. And so to have ignored that large external factor would be a problem. And so what we're really trying to talk about today is looking at that external lens, straining out the impacts of how those might affect our business, and figuring out what just doesn't really matter. So as you can see, this cute little animal here, I think it's a prairie dog, right? I have a lot of those by me. We want to look outside before we look in to get a fresh perspective. We can tend to get very myopic. I have worked with clients where they're clutching the Excel spreadsheet of how things are going and how it needs to go and how it's always gone and how things need to improve. There's a lot of stress, and I want to acknowledge that. There's nothing wrong with, the fact that you're passionate, but you can get very myopic and get connected to the stories of how you think things are doing. And so when we talk about looking outside, we really want to let go of what we know ever so briefly, right? That doesn't mean we abandon everything, but we just want to understand from a mindset as a marketer that we need to sort of relax how things typically go and the stories that we typically see with our customer and our business. And that's to allow for new information to come in. Today, we're going to use the PESTEL model as a guide. This is a management consulting framework that's been used for a very long time. Feel free to look at it. I've adapted it a little bit for purposes of our discussion today, but the categories are pretty simple. And so why we're using this is these are the lenses, the external lenses that we want to look at with respect to our business. We want to look at the political, the economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal. So I'm just going to start walking through that. But before I do, Maggie and I had a long conversation about what was the best way to bring to life these ideas and to do an analysis with a large group of people where we don't know anything about your individual businesses, because there are so many nuances to everyone's businesses. And then we thought, okay, well, we could use a 2 October's client, but then there was some sensitivity around data and that sort of thing. So what we thought is, let's pick an example that is really outside of our client list right now, and is something that relates to about half of the population, right? Potentially. So we're going to talk today about the PESTEL model and how that relates to Bosom Buddies, which is a selling and renter of breast pumping equipment and accessories. And the website's there if you want to check it out later. But What was interesting about this example is that when we juxtaposed it against the PESTEL model, we were like, holy smokes, a lot of things are impacted of that wheel with this type of a business. And so we're going to walk through that now. So ready, set, get curious. And for any business, really dig into your website, what's working and what's not. Read the reviews, even the ones that are scary where someone had a really bad experience. Know your competition, study your industry. So looking at that first lens for political, how do we define political? This isn't who's a Democrat and who's a Republican. That's another conversation for other people. Political is about how the decisions, and in this case, it wouldn't be US, it would be any government. We have some, the decisions that they make, how that influences the economy or specific industries. So this might be tax policies, employee protections, consumer protections. They may affect the business environment or the economic environment to a great extent. They may put a barrier in between you and your customer that you're not aware of, or they may be creating opportunity. And so on each one of these slides around the PESTEL model, I've added the question, how might this affect Bosom Buddies business? And I would say the same for your respective businesses. How might a recent political change impact your specific business? You may say, hey, Saran and Maggie, this doesn't affect my business at all. That's fine. Just tick that box and know that there isn't anything. But in the case of pregnancy and pregnancy discrimination, it's a really hot topic right now. And what jumped out at us was, 88% of expectant moms in the United States are working in their last trimester. It's incumbent upon us to recognize that making accommodations like water breaks and bathroom breaks is imperative. Okay, so why is that important to a company that rents and sells breast pumps and bras? Well, if 88% of the target population that we want to sell to is working in their last trimester, and I'm saying this broadly because we're looking at this through a qualitative lens for the most part. If they are working all the way up to having their baby, how does that impact the type of bra that they select? How does it impact the type of pump they may need? What kind of technology might they need for that pump? And I'll go through these around the model, but it's really just to challenge what is happening externally and what's happening with our business. Maybe some of the content or the copy really needs to address the fact that this pregnant mom is on the go, right? And maybe we need to publish a guide that talks about how to manage your breaks when you're at work, right? So just starting to think about what is that external circumstance that affects our buyer. So the next one is something that you may or may not be aware of, but Google Alerts are really important. It's something that I use all the time, particularly when I'm working on a new client. I want to understand what is happening in their world, and it's a quick way to get up to speed on what's happening. So, recently there was the Child Care for Working Families Act. President Biden is to the right, folks. I don't know a lot about it. Sorry.
I can jump in too. So I popped this example in because Google Alerts aren't new. We've all probably been using them for our brands for years and years, but this is a way to keep on top of political topics, or not political necessarily, but for political, it's a really good example. Because these things tend to change really quickly, and you have a day job. You can't keep track of all of these things. But if you identify something that may impact your business, like for Bosom Buddies, the Child Care for Working Families Act very well may impact their business, because with this act, should it pass, nearly 10 million children will get free or reduced cost childcare under the new proposed legislation. So what that means is that more children will be in childcare, and also more families will have that money that would otherwise be spent on childcare. So those are two factors that could very well impact the purchasing decisions of nursing or pumping mothers. So this could be something that you set, you monitor, and then you get the news as it comes out and as things change.
Thank you. That was much better said. So the second lens from the PESTEL model is economic. So not surprisingly, the economy's performance directly impacts companies, impacts consumers, and it can have resonating long-term effects. Right now, this is more of an observation. I don't know if it's necessarily factually based, but I'm hearing a lot that we're in an inflationary economy, and that affects what the companies will price, and it affects a consumer's purchasing power. Um, so it can affect the purchasing power and change demand and supply. And I know hopefully some of you haven't been affected by this, but supply chain issues where there isn't enough product available, and then the product that is available is at an inflated price. So, things that you can look at are the inflation rate, interest rates, economic growth patterns. As I mentioned earlier, COVID is a great example of this. There's been shortages, things cost more, purchasing patterns have changed. When we couldn't go out and shop, there was a heavy shift to online shopping. So within the United States, a resource that you can look at that's for free is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Everyone has their favorite, at least I do, business magazine, like The Economist and whatnot. I also look at a lot of what investment firms publish, and there's some links in here that you can check out. It's really just to make sure you know what's going economically and how that might affect the business. So for bosom buddies, if we're in an inflationary period, and a consumer has fewer dollars to work with, it might be more apt to buy fewer maternity items. Or maybe we need to offer a discount. We need to look at in our business, can we afford to offer a discount? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. But it's really just to be aware of what are the pressures that our consumers are under, and how do we need to shift, yes or no, in terms of our marketing. So Maggie, do you want to talk to the slide a little bit?
Yeah, so here we're introducing Google Trends as a tool that we use, and we have an example that complements what Serena was saying about economic trends and how they can affect your business. So if you're not familiar with it, Google Trends is another free Google tool that analyzes the popularity of top search queries in Google search, and you can change your view. You can segment it in a couple different ways. So by region, by language, and also you can change the time frame. So in this example, we charted the child tax credit, which right now is a hot topic. So this is just the last 30 days, and you can see the search volume peaked, I think probably early this week. So this child tax credit is a plan that will provide the largest tax credit of its kind for working families, a bigger tax credit than has ever been given historically. And most families are just automatically receiving these monthly payments. So it's around $250 to $300 per child, and that's without applying for anything. So again, this is another example that could affect the purchase decisions of people that we know have kids and that we know have now new money in their pockets. So I've seen this. I should have introduced myself a little bit more thoroughly at the start. One of my areas of expertise is e-commerce, and something that has always blown my mind a little bit is that come post-tax time, when people are getting just regular tax credits, we see this surge in e-commerce across the board. So that's a trend that we've seen for years and years. This is a very unusual trend, potentially, because it doesn't happen ever. And also it could particularly affect bosom buddies because we know that it's affecting people with children, and the younger your children are, the more tax credit you get. So it's just something that for them to monitor, essentially.
So another variable in our PESTEL model is sociocultural. And this includes cultural norms, expectations, health, consciousness, population growth rates, all kinds of things. I like to think of this as the culture. And by the way, I put hair on this to make it a lady because these are about the maternity aspect. So I didn't do such a great job on that, but so anyways, here are some of the sociocultural factors that it came up specifically during COVID. So in some cases, mom had to quit work. That led to less income for the family. The fear around COVID and being pregnant during a pandemic led to a decline in the birth rate. There's no vaccine for children under 5. So you've got moms with littles who are worried about the protection of their child. You've got mothers who are really trying to nurse because there are antibodies in the milk that get passed along. And there's just an overall feeling of fear. And so um, the reason why this is here is not to make everybody sad, but the reason is to think about our target and how this would affect the sales of um, maternity gear. So if there's less family income, can mom even afford to rent or buy a pump? Does that even make sense? If she's not going to work anymore and she can just nurse without aid of a piece of equipment, how does that impact Bosom Buddies business, BBB? If there's a feeling of fear around the moms, how may have she changed her purchasing behavior or her spending habits? If there are antibodies in the milk that she wants to pass along, does that mean she's doing more reading? Is she spending more time online after the kids have gone to bed to understand that? So again, substantive behavior change impacting finances, impacting lifestyle, and impacting how the children are fed, that in and of itself. So I'm just going to go back. So Maggie, do you want to speak to this one as well?
Yeah, so back to Google Trends. So what Sarin talked about on the last slide, so all of these factors that may be affecting the culture of your prospective buyers, all these things, these are their theories, and then what we want to do is draw out data that proves those theories. So we ask questions, we explore topics, and then we answer those questions with data. So this is an example. So the search term that we put into Google Trends is antibodies in breast milk. And our theory is that this is a new acute concern for nursing mothers, or something that people are potentially newly interested in. And the data proves out that that is in fact true. So in the last, so this is charting over the past 5 years. It's always been, of mild interest and mild demand, this sort of content, but it spiked at the beginning of January. So we also know that at the beginning of January, there was a large research study conducted that showed that the COVID vaccine is highly effective in producing antibodies against COVID-19 in lactating women. So what this means is that suddenly women who are breastfeeding their children can offer protection against the virus for their children who are consuming breast milk, which is really important because right now, no children under the age of 12 in the US can get the vaccine, and children under the age of 5 are not expected to be able to get the vaccine until 2022. So this is a potentially ripe topic for a company like Bosom Buddies to say their piece on. So whether it be blog content or just general content on the benefits of breast milk, this topic is changing, and people's thirst for knowledge is changing, or the type of information they're looking for is different than it was even a year ago.
Right. And how is the messaging for Bosom Buddies changing to meet this concern for parents?
Mm-hmm.
Should they? And what can they offer them? What can they offer mothers who are concerned? Does that mean they need a specific type of supply? Does that mean there's a resource we can connect them to? Does that mean we do a webinar on the topic of antibodies? It really creates a space for some creative exploration when you think about what the target's going through and how to support them. It can allow for more creativity as well. Next we go to is sort of technological. Fortunately, I don't think breast pumps look like what they look like on the left side, but the point of this slide and the PESTEL model is to really talk about how technological advancements can affect markets either favorably or unfavorably. And that's to some extent debatable. Some people will say, it's terrible now that everything's automated. Some people say, I think it's great. I don't have any time and I need it. So I don't want to put it through a lens of good or bad. I just want to say, look at what the event is or what the new technology is, and then figure for your own brand or business how you want to interpret that or not interpret that. So specific to Bosom Buddies business, wireless and wearable technology has really impacted how mothers are feeding their children. And that's a significant advancement. So women can now wear a breast pump underneath their clothing and say they've got, and this example was actually given to me, but say they've got 2 children, one that's an infant and one that's a toddler, they can wear this breast pump underneath their clothing and chase one child while they're getting milk for the other. And, how might that affect Bosom Buddy's business, right? You can measure things down to the ounce of what's produced now. So how do we want to talk about that when we're featuring our pumps and we're talking about the trade-offs between one and another? Do we just want to say, oh, it has this feature you can wear it, or we do want to say it's super efficient and you're going to be able to take care of the two of your children at the same time, and here's a product for your toddler and here's a product for you as the mother. So just again thinking creatively about how technological advancements in your specific industry or category may affect the messaging and the content and the approach that you take to meet your customer where they are. If they've got two kids and they're working from home and there's a pandemic, a wearable pump may be very, very important. So is Bosom Buddies positioned to grab more sales as a result of that? Are they talking about it in the right way? Is it showing up in search? How much do we want to hang our hat on that, right? How much can we boost the business and boost growth from that? And this also talks about technological. So Maggie and I were preparing for this presentation a couple weeks ago, and I know Medela pump, just because I'm a mom, is one of the #1 pumps on the market. And so she was saying to me, Maggie was saying, oh, there's this new pump on the market that's wireless. And I was like, huh. And she's like, let me look in Google Trends and see what's going on. Because Medela has been the category, like the de facto category leader for so long, that we were wondering about whether or not this new technological upstart LV, how they were doing in terms of mind share and search. Maggie, do you want to say a little bit about the data here?
Yeah, so what's super interesting here is, a company like Bosom Buddies might say, well, for the last 20 years, our #1 revenue driver has been Medela. And those numbers, haven't really changed much year over year. But if you look at this disruption that started around 3 years ago with the LV pump, and there are other like models that are doing this too, that this is changing under their feet, and it's just started in the last 3 years. 3 years ago, when my son was born, the LV was a really foreign concept. Like in general, this topic is weird for people. And the fact that the LV pump, it was like, you don't really get it. Like, how does it work? Like, I'm not going to wear this in meetings. That's what LV was pushing. Like, oh, women can wear this in meetings. Like, it actually had a bit of a stigma, a negative stigma when it first came out. But over time, and I don't know if it was whether they've fixed their messaging, I know they have a pretty strong influencer community on social networks. Maybe that's part of it, but this has changed. So if a company like Bosom Buddies isn't considering this change, then they're behind the times, and newly so.
And maybe instead of just featuring page after page of products, maybe there should be something at the beginning of the site when you first visit that says, what are you looking for? What are your features? Yeah. Right now, it doesn't have that. You're looking for wireless, you're looking for this, you're looking for that. But if I was Medela, I would be a little nervous, or I would be thinking about buying LV, right?
Yeah.
So it's just good. Whether your business is small, medium, large, doesn't matter. You should just know what that pace is. If a upstart company shows up and they have a technology that people actually want, that's going to shift business pretty quickly. And you want to be positioned, even if you're the 10th brand on the list, you want to be positioned to capture some of that share. And you should be really talking about the needs of what the customer is looking for and understand that. Google Trends is obviously one way to do that. I'd also encourage you to look on social, look on Twitter, look in business publications, like really be relentless in that, provided that you don't lose sight of kind of what you're looking to understand. So one of the other lenses in the PESTEL model is environmental. And when I first thought about this, I was like, okay, how are breast pumps? I literally was thinking this as I was reading the presentation. Like, what does environment have to do with breast pumps at all? Like, it's a mom and she's pumping milk and, but what I learned was that, and this is just one sample research brief that I found, there's actually a lot more on this topic, nursing without aid of any kind of machine actually is more carbon neutral. feeding a breast milk substitutes like formula has a larger carbon footprint. Sterilization of bottles contributes a lot to emissions. You could say, all right, well, I'm just looking to sell some pumps here. But if this trend over time, people become more aware of the fact that they want to nurse the child without aid of a machine or bottles or supplies, that's going to affect Bosom Buddy's business, right? All it takes is one article that someone writes on in a mass media publication for people to be like, well, God, I didn't know that was a problem. I didn't know that formula, is really bad for the environment. I don't want that for my child, right? I don't want to create a world where um, there's that's worse off than what I lived in. So it's not something to like, oh, the sky is falling, but it's good to be aware of climate, weather, the geographical location of your business, how the business is conducted. Consumers are very informed, especially with a purchase of a breast pump, which is can be like upwards of $1,000 item on the high end, right? So just want to understand the landscape for any kind of product. For example, when Keurig's first launched, I saw, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. When I saw those little K cups, I was like, and I was surprised that they took off because I felt, oh, they're really contributing a lot of waste to the environment. But some people really, really love them. But for some customers, they may say, I don't want to take that journey, right? So just factoring in what if any environmental constraints there are is really key. And then lastly, in the PESTEL model is legal, which I will say kind of overlaps a little bit with political, but it's specific to laws that affect the business environment. So obviously with something like maternity leave or paternity leave or pregnancy overall at work, there's a lot of laws around that. One thing that you can look at is obviously the Federal Trade Commission, and these are U.S. resources. I want to apologize for that, but in the Food and Drug Administration, and just how my safety in renting a breast pump, making sure what the legal ramifications are of the product that you're selling, or barriers or boundaries. Maybe someone's like, well, I don't want to rent a pump because it says here, my gynecologist or my doctor said that's really unhealthy. My baby could get an infection. Well, that's totally going to affect Bosom Buddy's business if that's the prevailing thinking. So it's just good to know within the context of the business that you are marketing or operating, if there are any legal gray areas that impact the sale of or rental of your product. And so that kind of concludes the PESTEL model. And I wanted to throw in a few other things, and then we'll get to internal data. So one of the things that I am most passionate about as a sort of lifelong marketer is really looking at the human being. It's not their age or income on a spreadsheet. It's really looking at who they are and what their challenges are. Are they part of a family? Are they single? Are they breaking out with acne? Are they going through a late stage menopause? Are they aware of their purchasing decisions or having to buy something because it's a necessity, right? It's really important to internalize the customer and be one step ahead. You want to know them like you know a relative in a perfect world, right? Because that's going to be the litmus test for your messaging, for your marketing approach, for your creativity of bringing new ideas and programs. So for example, if your customer does not have a high disposable income like Bosom Buddies, and you're not aware of their struggles and how feeding their child fits in, you're just kind of selling stuff. You want to go a level deeper if you're going to really create traction and double or triple your business. And it's not going to come from, well, I think they do this, and so we'll put this out in the marketing and see what sticks. Go a level deeper. The gold is in going a level deeper and really understanding their pain points and really looking at that humanity of who they are and what they're experiencing, and then thinking about how your product or service addresses that specific need. That's the goal. That's when someone sees a message from you or goes to your site and is like, oh, you totally get me. And think about the level of trust that opens up for you to be able to sell to them. And if you're passionate about the product or business the product that you're selling, it can be very fun. And then there's just a book. I had the benefit of working with this gentleman, John Steele from the UK. He really set the landscape for account planning and understanding qualitative work, which Qualitative is not data. It's about understanding user needs and attitudes and emotions. And so if you really want to go deep into that and really understand how some top brands have done that, I recommend this book. And it's also a fun read. It's not a boring business read. So really just from Target Insights, as far as Bosom Buddies, the moms are under a ton of pressure. Some of them may have had to give up a career that they loved because when COVID hit, there wasn't any support. We talked about, a lot of these issues. I don't want to go too far back, but, people feeding their child is an act of love and care. And it is, if you're not a parent or not an expecting mom or expecting dad, it can be a foreign topic. But when we think about it as it relates to Bosom Buddies business, and they're coming to your site desperate for information and they need something, it's really important to understand that ethos, so that you can create a connection, and then the connection can lead to growth of the business. One area that is also really important to cover that is a little bit light here is really just understanding the competition. That doesn't mean copying the competition, but it means understanding the world of decisions and choices that the consumer at the center gets to pick from. So they might be thinking, should I just buy formula? Forget all this other stuff. I don't want a nurse. I don't want any equipment. I don't want anything. I just want to buy something off the shelf and do it, which is totally fine. But that obviously affects the business if that's what you're selling. They're getting information from a lot of different areas, right? Pregnancy sites, doulas, medical equipment brokers. And so if they're getting a lot of messages, how do we want to control the narrative when they come to our site? How do we want to meet them if they've already been reading a lot of different things and have heard things from their doctor or heard things from a doula, right? So just again, thinking about their world and what they're experiencing and how to make a choice through that. And then Maggie's going to take you through this example really quick to kind of illustrate the Target's decision-making process.
I was at a marketing conference once where the keynote speaker said, "Who is Uber's biggest competitor?" And everyone said, "Oh, Lyft and Yellow Cab, etc." And he said, "No, Netflix is Uber's biggest competitor." So thinking outside the box, who is Bosom Buddy's biggest competitor? Probably there are some that are going to be similar companies that sell breastfeeding equipment online, but probably their biggest competitor, I mean, it's not really a competitor, is a woman's decision to breastfeed or pump or do both or feed formula. So Sue and I were talking about this when we were talking about who our target audience is, and Surin was saying, well, that target audience is probably a higher income, because some of these breast pumps, the high-end breast pumps, the LV we were talking about before, cost $500. And I said, well, true, like to have $500 to be able to spend that on a pump, which these pumps aren't covered by most insurances, that's a huge dent in people's pocket. But if you break down the alternatives, it's actually not that big of an impact. So for example, to feed a baby, just a very normal formula brand, which there are some really expensive ones too, but a very normal formula brand, that monthly cost is around $200. Whereas a monthly pump rental for a hospital grade pump, which are the best on the market, which costs $2,000, a rental is $70, and then the high-end breast pump again is $500. So a company like Bosom Buddies could start to break this math out to people, because Surin mentioned on the last slide or last couple of slides that this is a really foreign topic, that until you are in the weeds with a newborn, in weighing these financial factors, it's really hard to understand this environment. So to position this on their site or to their customers is a really critical competitive stance.
Yeah, they're missing an opportunity. They're missing an opportunity to say, you can just buy this from me once and it's cheaper. They're not doing any of that. They just have no fault of their own, but it just shows the products. There's no story. And as to the foreign concept piece, if people don't know until they're in market, as marketers, should we be educating those pre-parents? And what does that look like, right? Does that boil down to retargeting? Does that boil down to a specific audience that we want to go after? How does that change our targeting, and how does that change the experience? But this is a missed opportunity, because I would just look at this and say, your pumps are too dang expensive. I'll just find another way. But in reality, it's a lot cheaper. And again, notwithstanding, some people can't they can't pump or whatever, but just on the whole, they're missing an opportunity to message something of value. So when you receive the slides, you're going to get this PESTEL template. Hopefully it'll help. What you want to do, our guidance to you, is to go and identify what are the issues in each one of these areas that we walk through, and then what is the specific business impact for you. The answer could be none, but the reason why you want to go issue business impact, so that you can really challenge yourself to say, okay, does this affect my business or not? You could say it does, and here's what we're going to do about it. And here's how this might change our marketing, or maybe we're going to come up with some really cool campaign or email effort or whatnot. But hopefully this templates will be useful to you. Now we're going to go to Maggie. She's going to take us through our own beautiful data.
So now we're going to talk about first party data. So if it's not the amazing content that brings you back to October's workshop, maybe it's the really bad jokes. So audience insights, I want to go through some Google Analytics data that tells you a little bit about your audience. So Surin just covered an amazing in-depth approach for some qualitative analysis. This is definitely more quantitative, but I also want to warn that looking at your own internal data is potentially fraught with problems because there's bias in it. So if you have been targeting women between the ages of 25 and 34 for the last 10 years, that's going to probably show in your data. That doesn't mean that there's not opportunity elsewhere or something surprising. So keep that in mind, that it's good to do a combination of both. So a couple of questions that we like to answer when it comes to audience insights. So who are they? How did they find us? Where do they come from? What do they want from us? What are their interests? Who has pain points and what are those? And what technology is in play? All of these questions can be answered with Google Analytics data. So I'm gonna switch over to a dashboard, a Google Data Studio dashboard that's powered by Google Analytics data. This is just a better way to visualize it. Every data point in here comes straight from Google Analytics though. So here is some customer audience data. So no surprise, last month women were about 85% of females were 85% of Bosom Buddies revenue. Males only made up a small percentage. That said, look at that, but then monitor it over time because you might see something surprising. For example, look here in December, men took up nearly 40% of the share of revenue. So I don't know if that was from some sort of really, really tasteless breast pump equipment Christmas gift, or more likely that's the close of an insurance year. So perhaps that's the male in the household's task is to monitor insurance purchases and handle healthcare decisions like that. So either way, this is surprising that on a whole you will see that women make majority of the purchases, but that changes over time. Similarly, a couple more things I think were interesting here. Affinity and interest data. This is not my favorite thing to look at because, for example, pretty much any person on the internet is probably bucketed as a shopper. Some of this is just sort of like, okay, cool, nice to know. But if you explore this a little further, it could give you some inspiration for things like co-branding. So, for example, Bosom Buddies typically sells pumping equipment, but we're seeing that personal care or wellness, that's an interest of some of their purchasers. Is there a potential for expanding their product set or co-branding with a company that is more in the wellness area as opposed to just strict medical equipment? Let's see, a couple more things. Top combinations. I like to look at all these things together. So we looked at gender and age on their own, and affinity and interests on their own, but combine these all, because you'll find these more narrow glimpses into your audience data that can actually tell you something really interesting. So for example, I'm looking at this data combined, you know, clear chart toppers here with women between the ages of 25 and 44 driving most of the revenue. But look at this line. So men 35 to 44, there are not many that arrive at the site, but when they do, that conversion rate is 8%. So what's that telling us? And this is where you might want to combine this quantitative view with a more qualitative one, because for example, the number of surrogacies has increased every single year since the 1990s. So that just dismantles some assumptions we might have with age and with gender. So anyway, marry those two things together. And I'm gonna rush a little bit because now we're creeping up on time and we haven't allowed much time for questions. So please feel free to keep sending them over in chat. But the next thing I wanted to cover is organic search data. So organic search data basically tells us how well your website is communicating with Google and its searchers. And then more specifically, I want to talk about a tool called Google Search Console, which is another free Google service that can just tell you a great deal about your website and the people that come to it. And then one layer deeper, I want to talk about a tool that we built at 2 Octobers called 2 Octobers Explorer. And what this does is it harnesses the data from Search Console and it turns it into more meaningful insights. So I'm going to demo it really quickly here. And this actually is not Bosom Buddies data. So Bosom Buddies didn't have Search Console set up. So if you can take one thing away from this is if you don't have Search Console set up on your for your business, set it up, because then you can get powerful data like this. So this tab shows question searches. So it basically takes that keyword data, your organic keyword data or search query data, and then it segments it by queries that have questions in them. This is really important because this can help you generate long form content, FAQ content. In general, it's giving you a glimpse into when people got to my site, these were the questions they were asking when they got there. That's a really powerful insight into what your customers are thinking. A couple more things I want to show you here. So the opportunities by page report. Give it a second to boot up. So what's really cool here, and these filters are super powerful, but what you can see here are keywords that what we call they're in striking distance. So they're ranking at the bottom of page 1 or top of page 2, but maybe aren't necessarily getting a lot of traffic. So it makes it really easy to drill down into certain areas that are ripe for improvement. This can also inform your content strategy or your linking strategy. So all of these things, all of these insights in the way we're looking at this data is just meant to show you, meant to give you a guide in your SEO optimization and your content production. And then the last report here, and I'm really breezing through this. My colleague Noah Lerner, who is basically this was his brainchild. He did a full workshop on this, and let me actually send you guys the link.
And I was just going to say, while you're doing that, so we're talking about educating people on a foreign topic, and we want to reach pre-parents. Something like what Maggie just showed could be really useful as far as trying to uncover that target. in ways that your competition might not be able to do.
Exactly. Yeah, and I sent a link with more on to October's Explorer, and also a YouTube link to the workshop that Noah did, that he goes into this entire dashboard in depth. So I highly recommend, if this piques your interest, take a look at those. And the last thing I wanted to cover with in terms of internal data is paid ads data. So if you you know, are part of the Google monopoly of being forced to serve your ads on Google in order to get a chance to get traffic from Google to your site, I would justify that investment by what I call double dipping. So yes, we place paid ads in order to get traffic and in order to get sales or leads or whatnot, but we also need to be getting data from there, because that's perfect double dipping. So I want to show you two things I like to do with paid ads data. The first is within the search terms report. So search terms reports just shows you the actual queries that people are using to get to your site via your ads. The main difference I see between what I just showed you with organic search data and this is that we actually get more, we get revenue data and conversion data associated with it. So here's a search terms report. These are search terms that Buzz and Buddies got and the data associated with it. I'm just gonna filter for high volume queries and eyeball. So when I was looking through this, I was noticing, okay, there's a lot of plus size, large, plus size searches. Okay, that's interesting. So on this, and I've done some of the cleanup work here, so you'll have to do the pivot table on your own if you want to copy this, but I segmented that out. So, okay, I want to see plus size queries versus generic bra searches, and I want to see the data. And so what it shows is, yeah, a lot less volume, but way better performance. So better return on ad spend, better conversion rate. That's definitely an opportunity. Similarly, when I was looking through this, I was finding, so hemp was one, organic cotton, just or organic materials in general. There, we were asking before, you know, does sustainability does that play into our world at all for Buzz and Buddies? I think the answer is yes. We found data there. I broke those out. Anything containing organic cotton, hemp, sustainable, eco-friendly materials, that sort of thing. I broke that out and actually found some pretty impressive data here. So a lot of demand and slightly better return on ad spend. So again, this might be something that can help with positioning these products.
And also innovation, right? So maybe the business needs to grow substantively and they don't have an idea of where to start. So by looking through an environmental lens through the PESTEL model, they uncover that there's some new information there, and then they're seeing that people are searching for it. So maybe they need to quickly go source a sustainable bra. Maybe they need to educate. Maybe there's an opportunity to educate the market on the fact that those even exist, right?
Right. And the last report here is this is just an ads. Oh, where'd it go? An ads report. So how many times have you and a colleague debated, well, should we name our product this or that, or should we highlight this about this value proposition or that value proposition? And with paid search ads, especially text ads, you can test all these concepts head to head. So I pulled out the headlines for some of their top ads and I found immediately some things that stuck out. So using hospital grade in the terminology, that boosts your click-through rate, but doesn't necessarily yield as much, because my guess is you get there and you say, oh gosh, that's pretty expensive and I have to rent it every month. Maybe I just want to buy something. When you just go through when you just say breast pump rentals, then you have a better conversion rate. Maybe people's expectations are set before they even click on the ad. So yeah, really easy way to prove out internal debates. So moving back, and now I know we're at the top of the hour, so please feel free to hop off, because all we have left is our wrap up slide.
I'm going to speak quickly. Thanks for those who stayed on. I hope it was useful. At the end of the day, the insights are determined by you. You're in control of how wide you want to go with your analysis, provided that meets your objective. You are the subject matter expert on your business. You're not sort of a slave to the machine. You're going to be looking at different sources of input and making decisions about what is surprising in the information, what gives you pause, what excites you, right? Tap into those qualities, because chances are, since you're on the business day to day, there's something that's surprising to you. It might be surprising and great jumping off point for marketing ideas, innovation, messaging, your site experience. Just lastly, there is a tendency to go really wide if you get excited by information. So just make sure to map back to what you set out to learn, validate, or challenge, so you don't get buried in too much information.
All right, and then we have a couple workshops coming up, so check out our website in the upcoming training section and have a look at our next couple workshops, which this is out of date, so don't look that, sorry. And then last but not least, our contact information. So please feel free to reach out to us on any and all topics, but especially ones related to this workshop. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I invite you to connect with us on LinkedIn if there's something that you want to learn more about or you just want to connect.